Thank you, everybody. So in this session, we want to explore the general domain of skills. We throw the term around a great deal, and given that the concepts that the term reflects are absolutely central to this education shift, I think it behoves us to think fairly deeply about what we actually mean, and not only about what we mean when we talk about skills, but what those meanings imply. And going along with the theme that I introduced in the first session, what do the skills imply in terms of curriculum, in terms of teaching, and in terms of assessment? And so accordingly, I'm very pleased to host this panel where I'll introduce them properly in a moment, but where Sten Ludvigsen will be focusing more on the curricular perspective. Susan Douglas will be focusing more on the teaching and the pedagogical side, and Eleanor von Davier will be talking more about the assessment side. So what we need to be thinking about is how we deal with the challenges across those three different parts of the education system. So first, right to my left here, I have Sten Ludvigsen, and he's a professor in the Faculty of Education in the University of Oslo. And his research, I mean, I'm sure he's done a great many different sorts of research in his life because he's about the same age as I am, and I know I've done lots of different things. So notwithstanding, there are some particular parts of his research that are most relevant for us today. He's been looking at the fostering of cognitive and social skills in the use of digital learning technologies, for example, both in the education sector and in the workplace setting. Of particular interest to us today is his leadership over the last couple of years of a public committee that has been appointed by the Norwegian Parliament to report on the future of the Norwegian school system. So absolutely spot on the sorts of things that we're wanting to talk about today. Next to Sten is Susan Douglas, and Susan Douglas has two parts to what is of interest to us today. She's a senior advisor with the British Council, and in that role she provides sector advice to ministries of education, teacher educators and so on, and she brings to that role her knowledge and her experience as a practitioner in coordinating a cluster of schools in, I think it's in London.
Yeah, in West London.
In West London. And I hadn't really known about this particular approach to education in Britain, but apparently there are clusters of schools that are organised and focus more as a group, act more as a group. And then next to Susan, we have Eleanor von Davier, and she's the Vice President of ACT Next. And this is a relatively recent initiative of ACT. Eleanor is leading a team of experts that are responsible for developing a research agenda to support the next generation of learning and assessment systems. One of the really big challenges, as we heard last session, was around how do we go about the assessment here? And there's been a great deal of work at fairly sophisticated technical measurement levels as well as technological levels in assessment, and Eleanor's group is going to be bringing these areas together so that we can look at different ways of supporting both virtual and collaborative learning systems and assessment systems. So I think we've got a really nice set here of looking at the different aspects that we want to. Before we do that, I want to do a quick, what shall I call it, an activity to see what you think are the four most important skills. And this should raise some questions and some issues for us. So you can see on the screen at the moment, I don't know if you can see because Sten and Susan have got like heads. But if you can if you can see through their heads, if you could go online and enter that URL, www.menti.com, you'll see the question, which is around what are the four most important skills that students need for the 21st century. And you'll find there's four different little spaces there where you can enter your answer. you need to enter that code, 54317, and then you should be able to enter some answers. And what we'll do then is have a little bit of a look at what some of the common perceptions here are about what are the skills that our students and that our children need for the future. So we can see it's starting to populate already. And it's one of the things about this is it's fascinating. You know, what are skills? What are values? What are human characteristics? What are needs? What are attitudes? What are competencies? And you can see this vast array of, I guess we'll call them human characteristics for now, how we all think that very different things are important. We'll find that there's a great deal of commonality, and we can already see here that problem solving at the moment is in the lead. It's not like a horse race. You shouldn't actually go now for a different thing just to even it up. Maybe we should stop at that point, because otherwise it's going to overwhelm me. Oh, it went away. Hopefully we can get it back. But if you, from the very brief glimpse, all right, from the glimpse that we all have of it right now, problem solving, critical thinking, empathy, creativity, collaboration, how do we possibly make sense of this multiplicity of human characteristics? And importantly, how do we think that an education system can possibly comprehend all of these skills in a way that makes it possible for our education systems to deliver them? We might have to leave it open if it's causing a problem, yeah? Notwithstanding, the first thing that I think about when I see things like this is, well, how are there ways of categorising these? Do we put some of them into sort of cognitive skills? Are there some of these things that can be taught? Are there some that can be learnt or not? If we think about something like self-regulation, which is not a really big item there, but it's sitting there, and think about the preparedness of teachers in a classroom. Does a teacher know how to go about teaching self-regulation to a child of 5? What about when that child is 8? What about when that child is an adolescent and moving into 14? Does the teacher understand how self-regulation itself develops and matures over the age span? Does the teacher understand about human development, about how we acquire both cognitive and social skills, how we go through different levels of understanding and maturation? All of these questions are absolutely central to if we're going to make this shift to skills. So we need to be thinking very carefully about what are the skills that are practically possible for a formal education system to help students with. And I think Darius in the last session talked about values. Where we have particular values, can those values be taught? Are they learnt? So there's a lot of questions here. We can talk about something like problem solving, and we know that from the vast research on problem solving that we can identify sets of processes that we can go through. You know, we can identify, if we have a problem space, we can identify what the artefacts or the modules are in that space. We can identify what the goal is, and then we can work out how do we navigate through that problem space. But if we talk about some of these other areas, the values, self-regulation, collaboration, are we actually in that same space? So there are lots of questions here that are raised by our different understandings of what 21st century skills or generic skills or transversal competencies are and how they translate into the realities of an education system. So they're the sorts of issues that I would like us to get into during this session. And I'm first going to throw it over to Sten. Sten, so you've been working on the curriculum reform agenda for Norway for the last few years, and I'd like you to reflect on this issue of the choice of skills. How can you ensure that the skills that you select within Norway are ones that are going to be teachable?
Okay, I think the first premises for me is that schools have really two different mandates. One is to educate citizens for mastering their life, and the other one is getting ready for the kind of workforce, and they are equally important. And there is a tendency in the kind of skills framework and the research that's underpinning this skill framework to really emphasize, I would say, the workforce argument. So say that some of these skills that I would call the soft skills, like communication, collaboration, and so on, they come out of a number of surveys where you ask business leaders in the private, both private and the public sector. And it's interesting because the questionnaire that's used to address some of these skills don't ask about the subjects in schools. So there is a bias in the research instrument themselves, which I think is quite problematic. And that was our first experience looking into the kind of the skills, the common skills and the frameworks and so on that was out there and it's been out there for the last 10, 15 years. So I think there is the problematic issue here is that some of these research really under-communicate the need of the specific domains subjects in schools. So that's kind of the first statement. The second statement is that I see schools as loosely coupled systems. So there is no direct relationship between what happens in the minister's head and what's going on in the classroom. And we have, as my colleague from Guinea said, we have tons of evidence of that. But sometimes we talk about that like if you have policy at high level, that just become implemented. And I think that's really the wrong assumption because what you implement and what you improve is the practices based on certain ideas in the curriculum. And it's a different way of looking at that. So the way we understand school, I think, is pretty important when we talk about the skills. So I can give you two pictures that I can imagine. On a Friday morning, I go out to school, up secondary school, and I see what the kids are doing. They're not kids anymore, they're teenagers. And they are solving different tasks. They're actually doing tasks that accumulate to solving a problem and so on. And the teacher are walking around to the small groups, and they are kind of struggling both with the content and with the communication. So to me, that means sometimes the split we do between the subject domains in school, like mathematics, and the skills is a false kind of assumption. It's a dichotomy that we should really try to avoid in discussion. You can imagine me sitting, I'm newly elected as a dean, going into the dean meeting and say to the dean of mathematics and natural science, you guys should not talk about content anymore. You should talk about skills. They will just start laughing. Sorry about that. If I say that they will talk about mathematics, problem solving, intuitions, and so on, they will be very happy about that. So there is a real question of how we as an educational community choose to formulate ourselves when we talk about with the domain specialists, because I really think we need the domain knowledge. So in the Norwegian committee that I was leading, we was asked to do two things. It was asked to have a plan for renewal of the subjects in the school, and that's a pretty demanding task to give 10 people and do that within actually 2 years. So we went into domains like mathematics, science, technology, the languages, social science, and humanities. And then we did analysis of how those domains are formulated in the curriculum. And the first finding we will kind of report on is that it's really too much. It's too much curriculum. We need to prioritize. So that's the first finding. And that has been known for 30 years. That was not very new in a way. But I think it's very important that we can recognize that curriculum is full of good intentions that's not prioritized. And to me, that's really the kind of the essence of doing a curriculum analysis. The second finding is that a lot of the content is not relevant for the kids that's growing up. It's relevant for, I would say, us, not even for us. It's actually backward looking. So what kind of mathematics do kids need today? They probably need to understand how an algorithm will work, how they should compute different forms of problems. The computational thinking is getting more and more important. Underlying that is really very advanced mathematics. So that kind of shows that we can't really have the split between the domain and the kind of the problem solving, communication, and different types of skills. So that's one example. If you look at, for example, the social science, they should prepare the kids for taking part in the democratic society with all the values that's embedded in that. And it's probably not a good idea to only teach them about how a municipality, how a regional system, how a parliament is built up only in a cognitive way. To me, it seems that it's way more interesting for the social sciences to engage the students in value-laden questions. If you look at the curriculum, it's very cognitively oriented. It's, I would say it's pretty boring. And I can understand that teenagers don't see the relevance of that. So that means that in all the subjects, Norwegian government, as I'm sitting here, appointing committees to renew them, to make them relevant for children, for kids and for teenagers and for the students. And I think that's really important because these subjects is constitutive of what the students can learn. And I'm coming from the learning sciences as when I'm not doing a kind of policy work. And what we know from there is that some of these generic skills that we talk about, and I think they are really, really important, grow out of the subject domains. But you need to have the relationship between the content and the meta competences involved. To just teach the meta competences would make it very empty. So I think that's really the important message, I think, in our work. And I think what's intriguing here is that the subject specialists in teacher education and in universities, I don't think it's that difficult to actually talk with them, engage in discussion with them, and so they could also communicate the kind of the meta level of their own domains. That's an epistemological question for them, and I think for them that's an intellectually intriguing issue to engage in with their students. So I really think that's possible. So I'm quite optimistic about that for the next years, but it will take some work to communicate the relevance of this kind of the double layer here. The principle that we concluded with is that could sort out and solve all problems. I don't think that will do that. But it's an old finding in the learning sciences. That's the only principle that you can use to sort out the curriculum, is that if you engage the student in in-depth learning. That has been around in the learning science for the last 30 years, but it's never implemented because the curriculum is, as one said in some US colleague, it's a mile wide but an inch deep. And that's our problem as curriculum designers. If we are not able to create a curriculum that really can foster the in-depth learning processes over time and follow up that with formative assessment and see how each student's progress, we will not be able to create a more advanced system that could balance the domain knowledge with the new types of skills that we need.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the things that raises immediately is, it's how do you have a curriculum that can engage students and that teachers can ensure that there is depth of learning from students? So it automatically lands in your bailiwick, Susan. You've been involved in a lot of large-scale support to teachers. How have you gone about that in this context around the core schools of the British Council and so on? How have you gone about it, and what does it comprise?
Yeah, thanks, Esther. Well, the British Council has been working to support teachers in the area of pedagogy around skills since about 2015, and we've done that in response to various conversations we've had in the countries in which we work, which have kind of identified three major problems, all of which, you'll be unsurprised to hear, have been mentioned this morning. So the first is around a group of young people who are becoming increasingly intellectually disengaged with their schooling because of a perception that what they're getting in school isn't really relevant to their future lives or to their employability prospects. The second is that as technology advances, employers are wanting to employ people with higher cognitive skills, but because our assessment processes are largely still focused on knowledge, that teachers are finding it really difficult to move away from a focus on teaching and securing that knowledge. And then finally, because communication technology has advanced so much, the kind of possibilities for human interaction is greater than ever before. And whilst that's exciting in lots of ways, people are telling us that it's really, really important that young people are taught the skills to use that effectively, to question what they're reading, and to really engage critically with what they're learning. So we focused on 6, we call them core skills, just another name to throw into the mix. We focus on 6 core skills. Good to see that they were mentioned in the word cloud earlier on. That's a relief.
Lucky.
Critical thinking, critical thinking and problem solving, collaboration and communication, digital literacy, citizenship, student leadership, and creativity and imagination. So that's the why bit, and over the last couple of years we've worked in about 45 different countries in Asia, in Africa, in the Middle East, in the UK and in the Americas. We've worked with about 35,000 teachers, but your question focused on the how, really, so I'm going to move on to that. One crucial point, I completely agree with you, is that these skills need to be embedded into the teaching of subject areas. We think that developing the pedagogy around core skills can't be at the expense of subject knowledge or indeed mastery. We believe that knowledge and skills are interwoven, and when students are developing both simultaneously, they learn more efficiently, essentially. There's a really useful quote, which I'm going to read out from Joe Kirby, which says, I've lost it. Knowledge and skills are like a double helix, progressing in tandem from surface learning to deep learning. Skill progression depends on knowledge acquisition. So the timing of the introduction of core skills we think is crucial. We think students need surface knowledge first in terms of facts, and once they've mastered that, teachers can then phase in deep learning skills that test the application and manipulation of those facts. So one of the things that we've done in preparation for our work with teachers is that we've worked with school leaders and policymakers to look at where there are opportunities in their current curriculum offerings to actually teach skills. And the really interesting thing has been that actually in lots of the countries in which we've worked, there are actually lots and lots of opportunities to already teach skills that are writ large within the curriculum, but teachers aren't necessarily doing it. And that's largely due to, A, not feeling confident of knowing how to do it, and secondly, that focus on the assessment processes often taking precedence. So back to teachers. Let's see if this works. Marvellous. Well, we all know from Hattie that teachers are the biggest influencers over student performance in terms of the things that we can influence. Obviously, there's a raft of research that underpins that, but one of the most compelling bits of research for me is the piece that Hammershek and Rivkins did in 2006, which took 50 teachers. And their study demonstrated that if you took a group of 50 teachers and you were taught by the most effective, you would learn in 6 months what those that were taught by an average teacher would learn in a year. And if you were unlucky enough to get the worst teacher out of that group, it would take you 2 years to learn the same thing. So actually, much of our work is focused on encouraging teachers to reflect, encouraging teachers to ask, why do I do what I do? Why do I have the habits that I have? And trying to create a culture of teachers critically reflecting on what they do and really developing, as that gentleman said at the back earlier on, the creativity in the classroom that can find solutions to what we're trying to deliver. Hattie also makes us aware, and we've also discussed this morning, of course, that initial teacher training doesn't often equip teachers with the pedagogies to deliver these skills. And then to exacerbate that, teacher improvement tends to kind of plateau after 3 to 5 years when, during that first initial period, teachers are learning on the job, and then that kind of teacher improvement tends to slow. And of course, that's because at that point, improving pedagogy is as much as about breaking bad habits as it is about learning new knowledge, and we all know how difficult it is to break a habit, don't we? Dylan Williams says about that, doesn't he? The hardest bit is not getting new ideas into people's heads, it's getting the old ones out. And once new habits have been created, then negotiating that informal contract with students so they can really make the most of those new methodologies. We also know that this takes time, and we know that from other disciplines as well. This graph shows the different amounts of practice that different types of violinists have done. It shows that those that are world class have already done 40% more than professional violinists and 56% more than semi-professional violinists by the age of 18. Malcolm Gladwell obviously popularised that in his book, The Outliers, where he talks about the notion of 10,000 hours of study and deliberate practice and reflective practice. But it's just hard to know, isn't it, where busy teachers are going to fit in 10,000 hours of deliberate practice into what is already quite a frenetic life. So at the outset of our work, we were clear about two things. A, we needed to focus on supporting teachers to be more effective at engaging in deliberate practice and collaborative reflection. And B, in order to avoid this frustratingly wasteful use of workshops and conferences, we needed to design CPD that enabled teachers to actually break some habits, that enabled them to experiment with new methods, that enabled them to discuss with each other resulting challenges and resolutions, and then engage in deliberate practice. Joyce and Showers said that most teachers, when they take on a new method, try it once or twice and then go back to the way they always used to do it. Whereas actually it takes between 20 and 25 times of practicing something to really be able to use it effectively. So in undertaking our work around the world, we've based our work on some core principles, which I'm going to whiz through now. Firstly, intensity. Although the training packages are different in different countries around the world, there's a kind of minimum of 15 contact hours, and actually in most cases it's nearer 30. Secondly, those training packages are spaced, so teachers meet more than once. They keep coming back. It's not a one-off workshop. And that hasn't been easy in all the countries that we've worked in, to be honest. One-off workshops are more usual. They're cheaper. They're easier to run. They don't impact on teacher release time and all those sorts of things. But we've stuck to our guns on that, and all of our teachers kind of work with each other over the course of at least a year and meet 3 times over the course of that period and plan action plans for when they go back into school. The third and fourth principles that you see on there are about enabling teachers to engage in modelling and giving them opportunity to practice what they've learnt. And we've tried to enable that by ensuring that at least 2 professionals from each school are involved in our training packages so that they get the chance to go back and practice together and observe each other and look at what's worked and what hasn't and discuss it again and refine it again and keep practicing. We've then tried to ensure that teachers have the opportunities to both give feedback to each other but also receive feedback from their school leaders so that they can deeply reflect on whether a new strategy is working. We've ensured that the packages are evidence-based, even though we've all got stacks of it in our office. I completely agree. But they're the correct mix of theory and practice. And finally, and we think this is really important, we've enabled teachers to work in teaching learning communities because we think that those are really important in terms of focusing on improvement once the training has finished. And we found that because teachers with our programs have the opportunity to engage in international professional learning communities, that's been really motivational for teachers to continue with that work. I haven't had time to go into the content of the courses, so I'm just going to do a 30-second case study on one, just to finish. And I'm going to do it in bullet points, because I'm a bit scared of Esther. It's from the UK. It's from the UK. So here goes, bullet points. The course, Critical Thinking and Problem Solving. The specific focus was around developing higher order thinking skills. The particular new techniques that were adopted and practiced, you'll all be familiar with them, but you know, the no hands up policy in class, the notion of, and I can never say this, pose, pause, pounce and bounce techniques of questioning, think, pair, share approaches, hot seating, role play and mind mapping. So there were various different techniques they tried to put into practice. They mapped what happened really carefully, and what was interesting was that the balance at the start of that project was about 50-50 in terms of the numbers of questions teachers were asking, the numbers of questions that children were asking. That had shifted by the end to being about 30% teacher-led and about 70% child-led. And they'd also mapped the types of questioning to Bloom's taxonomy, which showed that actually there was a development in terms of the questioning that children were asking. Best quote from that, from a child, of course. They always are, aren't they? We love questioning now. We're like Sherlock with mysteries. And the biggest challenge the teachers felt that they had to overcome was a fear in teachers that they might not be able to answer the questions that the teachers had to ask.
Yeah. No, that's
Okay.
lovely. Yeah, thank you. I think that what Susan was talking about in terms of breaking habits, trying out new things, exploring, and okay, practicing as well. But that whole issue of trying new things, exploring, is absolutely analogous to the world of skills itself. This is what we're looking for in students, that they will try different things. They'll apply their skills to new contexts. And what that means, of course, is that we're interested in how students deal with non-routine contexts. How, therefore, do we go about assessing what is non-routine? Our assessment methods are pretty much based on that traditional concept of here is a content question and it's right or wrong. So we can easily identify the answer. But where we're trying to look at how students develop skills to apply in non-routine contexts, it becomes very, very difficult to assess those skills. And so, Alana, this is hopefully where you're moving into. It's around that innovations edge of assessment, an assessment of skills. So I'd like to know, what are you doing and what are the challenges in trying to capture these human characteristics?
Thank you, Esther. Well, it's quite interesting listening to the panel this morning and to my colleagues just before. I noticed that in all of these conversations, nobody really brought up the technology that is actually around us and can be helpful in pretty much all the aspects of the conversations. We can help teachers. We can, I guess my microphone is on the right, so I'm sorry for the people on the left, unless I move with my body. So we need to, problem solving indeed. So we can use the technology to our advantage in helping students, helping parents to know how to help students, and helping teachers and help them with those number of hours of practice, because it's not humanly possible to expect from teachers to do as much in a classroom. But if we are able to create the right technology, we can perhaps augment what the teacher does through homework and through facilitators using artificial intelligence tutors. So this is where my work actually is finding itself, building platforms that are either web-based, but more and more mobile platforms that reach our kids inside in the country and across and around the world. Because what poor kids and rich kids nowadays have in common? Everyone has a smartphone. I mean, just look at how we started this session. We all started asking those questions and getting your answers through a smartphone. So why shouldn't we try to reach out our children through the medium that is the most common, accessible to them? So my approach to assessment is from the perspective of learning and from the perspective of matching the needs of the students. And to go back to why are these skills so hard to measure? What are the problems that we encounter when we build assessment from them? What does it mean for an assessment company like mine, ACT? Many of you might be familiar with the ACT test, has been around for many, many years. ACT test is the test with that leads the admission into college, at least in this country. So the question is, what does it mean for a testing organization like ours to develop assessment for the 21st century skills, or this breadth of skills that we've been talking about? Well, there are all types of challenges, as we just heard before. The definition is still an issue. We have, from different experts, different definitions. How do we go about implementing an assessment if the experts can't agree on a theoretical definition of those skills? We still have a problem with disentangling cognitive skills and social skills. When are those compensatory, and where we need them separately? We also seem to have a problem disentangling domain-specific skills from cross-domain skills, these transferable skills that we hope to be able to measure that should be relevant across multiple disciplines. How do we disentangle that? Is a person as good of a collaborator in an area where the person is knowledgeable, as the person is in an area that's new for that person? So cross-domain, within-domain differences. For another challenge is, how do we take into account the individual contribution from the team contribution? How do we disentangle that in a collaborative assessment? And of course, there are other factors that have been on Susan's slide there about the students themselves. And that had the highest percent on the pie chart on Susan's slide. So individual cognitive skills, personality, gender, and so on, achievement prior to assessment. So what do we think in assessment? I mean, my background is in statistics and mathematical modeling, so quite different than probably most people here. So what do we think that are potential solutions? How would we approach, as an assessment organization, how would we approach this collaboration in serving our students, teachers, and parents in helping bringing up the next generation? So I think that one hypothesis is that we need the evidence about the process of displaying a particular skill. And I will say more about that in terms of what that means. First of all, it's related to everything I said before, where we still have challenges. What is what we are trying to measure, and what is of interest? How do we define that? And then what is the type of task or item or question that we need to develop so that the evidence that we collect is actually supporting a particular claim we want to make about that construct? But we need to focus not on a response, correct or incorrect, or a self-report. I think I'm a great collaborator. Well, maybe. But the point is, can you show that? And what does it mean for an assessment company to develop tests that are actually able to capture the information about the process and to provide people with feedback about that? The other question is related to the process information. Think of it as a little big data. It's still little because it's small by comparison with what financial analysts have to work with, or with what marketing experts work with at Walmart. Nevertheless, it's big data, especially for education. We are nowadays able to track clickstream information from a person interacting within a virtual system, in a game or in a simulation, or with an intelligent tutoring system, or even in a collaborative environment. That are big data, and we need to learn how to disentangle, can we extract the signal out of the noise from the big data. And of course, another approach we have in psychometrics is to go beyond our traditional field. And I introduced the concept of computational psychometric, and I introduced that about 2 years ago. And what that means is we are blending the theory-based assessment, theory-based definition of constructs with what the data would tell us, with knowledge discovery out of the big data. So this is the definition of computational psychometrics. In terms of the message that we'd like you to take from here is that if we want to build assessments for this type of skills, critical thinking, collaboration, self-awareness, metacognition, it's my favorite. I haven't seen it there, but it is one of my favorite, and I don't really know how to test that. But if we want to build assessments around these issues, we can't just go to Stan alone, or to Susan by herself, or to me as a psychometrician. We need all of us, and we need more than what we have here on the panel. We need different expertise, and each of this area that you see there on this screen is actually not just one project or one person. Each area may actually represent a full research agenda in how do we need to tackle these skills. I want to emphasize a few things here. One is about the technology and delivery in scoring, because in some instances in the world, we might need to do so without the technology. And then at what point are we able to do that? So at what point is the technology helping us sufficiently well so that we already have the assessment in place, we know what we are looking for, we have the scoring rubric in place, we have a teacher's training in place, so that we can eventually work without that technology that at this point is helping us. Another point I want to make is on the left there on the screen is on multimodal analytics. And I had a conversation this morning that was quite interesting. Nowadays, we can use sensors, we can use Kinect, we can use other types of data collection modalities that would allow us to learn about the process of displaying a skill. Why is that relevant? Well, imagine that we can have this opportunity and then create an automatic way to score those kids, to provide feedback to them, to identify the gaps they have. And that's why it's called multimodal analytics, because it could contain recognizing the affective states in which the students are while they are collaborating or working on a particular project. So if we are able to identify when a student is frustrated, for example, we can adapt the next module, instructional module, accordingly. We can make it more difficult, easier, a bit more entertaining, depending on the age of the student. Many of you are probably familiar with the concept of adaptive testing. This has been around for many years. In adaptive testing, we adapt the items on the test to the ability of the student. If the student solves an item correctly, then we will give a more difficult item. If the student has an incorrect response, then we'll provide an easier item. Well, now imagine we can do a similar algorithm, but for affective states. If the student is engaged, then you might want to give the student more of an instructional module because it looks like the student is actually able to absorb that new information, more challenging information. But if you notice that the student is struggling, then perhaps you might want to scale back or provide more feedback. So these are the main messages I would like to give for today, and I would be happy to see what you think about, is that we can actually use the technology, and we can also use the advances in psychometrics, in computational psychometrics, by including the longitudinal component of process data to help develop these assessments around non-cognitive skills, around the 21st century skills, and around performance assessments. So all types of tests that include this time component are those that can benefit from this framework.
Thank you, Alena. And notwithstanding some of the technological challenges there, I'm aware also that, you know, when we talk about being able to measure a lot of characteristics with log stream data and so on, The other big challenge with this is being able to attribute behaviours to particular characteristics. So when a child, for example, responds to an item in a certain way online or takes longer than another child, do we attribute that to the ability of the child, or do we attribute it to the fact that the child was distracted by something else, or that his mouse didn't work, or whatever it is? And there's a whole plethora of issues that underlie technology-based assessment, and therefore equally what we can learn from that we need to be able to start translating into the classroom. And if you think about it in the classroom too, often a teacher might assess or judge or evaluate a student in a certain way without really understanding why the student is given the particular response that they have. So then we move into the formative assessment space as well. So I think huge number of different issues that have been raised from this. We'll take any questions from the audience. If you'd like to raise your hands. Sorry, the blonde lady, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. And then Karina, thank you. And then up the back.
First of all, thank you very much for the informative presentations. I was wondering if you could comment on the viability and the contribution of serious gaming. Serious games really feed into the ability to assess performance. It can be adaptive, and I know that the psychometric models are lagging behind, so I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Thank you. Next question. We'll take Karina, just up here.
Thank you for fascinating presentations. I have a question for Alina. From your perspective, I'm just curious, if you've presented everything that has to be done and all of the different components for us to start to understand how to assess 21st century skills or the breadth of skills. And I'm wondering if, as you were sitting, listening to your co-panelists, what Susan was presenting, are there things, or even in this report, are there skills that you think as a psychometrician that these are the skills that can actually be assessed with some degree of reliability? There are skills that can actually, where we can develop assessments that we can capture change over time, change across different groups, change in different age groups, and be able to actually, with some degree of reliability and precision, attribute those changes to, as Esther was saying, to what's actually offered in the formal education system as opposed to what, students bring from outside the classroom.
And there was another question up the back, the gentleman up. Thank you.
Okay, Esther.
Hi. My name is Mentor. I'm with Ashoka. And two things, a question that I want to ask is, when we're looking at today's, for example, children, a 12-year-old gets bored today. And my nephew, for example, all the time in the phone, and what Sten said, that education is focusing on, yes, these lifelong learnings, right? Something that keeps you joyful in life. And then another one is how to be productive member. So I'm just wondering, how can we make sure that children, with all these skills, don't just step onto their joy and to their creativity and to their life? Because many times I'm feeling that we're giving them so much that they're losing that inner joy, in sense, inner childlike behavior.
Thank you. And last question up here at the front.
Hi there. My name's Katie Giles, and I'm with Chemonics Institute. I've been really impacted by this discussion this morning and the outcomes of children who are experiencing frustrations. And then we talk about testing and diversity in schools. especially cross-cultural, children with disabilities, LGBT community. There's so many impacts within that community that causes frustration. How do you suggest that we approach that from a diversity perspective? Or, if somebody, a child or a student becomes frustrated, what do we do to approach that? Or what would you suggest to match and meet the needs of diversity within these student communities?
Thank you. All right, so we have a couple of questions that are very clearly assessment issues, but I think that does not mean only Alina can answer them, of course. So first of all, though, we might go to the serious games. Did you want to go for that?
Sure, of course.
Can do that.
So I agree, serious games have a good potential. We are definitely working on those. There are several, so you actually asked two questions. So one was, what do we think about serious games, whether they can be considered for assessment? And my answer is definitely, especially for learning and assessment, less so probably for high-stakes assessment, because games bring with them exactly that piece that makes them very engaging, is a gaming and competition-like variable that may actually impact negatively some of the people who will take those as part of a high-stake assessment. So for that reason, games perhaps are not the best for high-stakes assessment, but they can be wonderful environments for teaching synthesis or transferable skills. Now, the second question was, why are the psychometric model lagging behind? And that's a very good question. So the main reason why that's the case is that the data that we get from the process of everything, including in a game, is that those data have a sort of dependency. What I'm doing now depends on what I've done before and what I've done before and what I've done before. And if I work with somebody else, then this dependency is even more complex. It will mean not only that it depends on what I've done before, but it also depends what my partner did before. So that level of dependency is actually unmet yet or at that scale in psychometrics until recently. So we at this point have to look into other disciplines' experience with dependent data. So that's what I started a few years ago, and when I started to hire people with a PhD in physics, with expertise in fluid dynamics, for example, on dynamic systems. So this is expertise that is kind of unheard of in educational measurement. But that's the type of knowledge we need to make sense of the process data. And this is why it still takes time. People experimented with Bayesian networks. However, they never had sufficient data. In order to be able to run models like that or dynamic models, you need a lot of people, and you also need a very long stream of sequences of events in order to make sense properly of those data. So that's another challenge. Most of the times, games simulations have been administered to one classroom here, another classroom there. But that's not sufficient for models like this, for dependent data to work reliably and validly. So that's the main reason. But I would like to hear what my colleagues here have to say about games from their perspective.
I can start. I'll start from the boring side. Not a selling argument. There is 3 or 4 really good meta-analysis and reviews out there, and they come to very different conclusions than the game industry themselves. Of course, and one of this most recent one is published in the Review of Educational Research, which is one of the highest ranked journals. So that means that what stands in their journal is really true. So pay attention to that. And what they basically says is that the games that we have seen so far, of serious games, is mostly directed to root learning, not to advanced skills. That's a very important finding. The other one is that it's really difficult to scale to a curriculum level. So that means that you use this for kind of single activities. And the third thing is that, and that's a boring part, it's really dependent on the content and pedagogical design. And that's kind of oral truth for this anyway. So I think there is a kind of a promising route, but I think we should also be quite skeptical and critical to what the game designers are coming up with, because it's a very long distance for having fun and actually learning a concept in a specific domain. And I'll add one comment to that about the kind of data processing that we can do now. So when I talk with my colleague in computer science department, he's concerned about how we can increase the speed and the capacity of information, how we can increase the speed of that. So we get 3D, 4D, 5D, 10D. And he has a very different question than I have, because I would say that we can't really use that metaphor for human cognition. It's not about speed. It's really about the quality of the thinking that takes time. So I think we have two kind of parallel universes here. One that's looking at kind of maximizing data, which I think is an interesting idea to follow. But if we don't balance that with the kind of the insights about human cognition, that in-depth thinking is maybe boring, it takes time, but it actually what gives you the insights to solve problem and so on and be part of teams that can solve even more advanced problems, I think we will miss the point. And I think we have seen that in a high number of studies that technology itself doesn't help. It's the quality of the processes involved that involves the reasoning processes that really makes the difference.
One of the things to be aware of is that we can use these as approaches to assessment not only to assess the students themselves, but to help us understand a lot more about the skills that we are actually interested in. So a great deal of the research work that's happening now in terms of what Eleanor is talking about and what Sten has just mentioned actually is contributing to our understanding of what sorts of skills do you need to bring together when you're interested in a complex skill set, such as collaborative problem solving, or if we even go to global citizenship, where we need to bring a whole lot of sub-skills together. And so trying to understand how those come together, we can start to explore that through some of these technology-based approaches. I do want to go now to the question from the gentleman in the back and from the front here too, about the issues around frustration and diversity. Susan?
Yeah, those are the two questions that I was really interested in talking about further. I mean, the first one, I think I share the same nephew with you. We have the same problem. Yeah. And I think that's a really interesting point, because one of the really big challenges I think that we have with our school systems all over the world is the fact that things become the way that we do them really quickly. Schools are really historical places. You know, in England, why do we ring the bell at 10 to 9? Well, because that's the way we've always done them. And so, you know, a little bit about what I was talking about earlier on about trying to inculcate a culture amongst our teaching profession, which is about continuously looking at the way we're doing things and working out whether it's fit for purpose. Because what was fit for purpose last month or last year may not be fit for purpose next month or next year, because things are developing so rapidly. And I think it's about giving teachers the confidence to be experimental, actually, sometimes. And that's quite difficult. We haven't mentioned quality assurance systems very much today, but sometimes that's quite difficult, isn't it, when you've got quality assurance systems that judge us on our exam results and judge us on our performance in the classroom. If actually what you're trying to do is you're trying to develop new pedagogies that might be of greater interest to those 21st century children that are out there wanting more and more, and enabling them to bring some of their experience and some of their interest into the classroom to work with. And one of the things that I'd just like to share with the lady that brought up the issues about inclusive practice is that in the Connecting Classrooms program that I work on, we work in about 35 different countries, and the single most common issue that teachers are bringing up across that program is about inclusion, about how do we ensure that all our young people can access and engage in the skills agenda. And that's quite an interesting debate, because I think once you start to get into that, how do we ensure that all young people engage and access their education is that there are often similar answers, whether it's skills or knowledge or values or whatever else you're talking about. And so, again, I think that comes down to enabling groups of practitioners to work together to look at creative solutions to ensuring that all our young people can be included in this type of work.
I just wanted to comment on that, which was, now that you brought the last question. I think technology definitely can help. I mean, we have experimented with haptic systems for specific disabilities. We have experimented with the choice of a computer agent that will match the characteristics of the student. We have experimented with building a facilitator for particular learning or collaborative interaction, so in such a way that the intelligent facilitator is actually attuned to the particular disability or particular interest of the students. So those, I just want to point out that there is some hope that these systems can be more tailored to different needs. So that's the main message. They are not going to replace what we are going to do in school or what the teacher is doing, but they can help for those who don't have anybody else at home that may help them, or they could just be offered as practice and environment in which the students could do their homework.
Thank you. I'd like to go to just a last round of issues to discuss here. And Sten, first to you. I think obviously the paper that your panel, your group has put together appears to defend the idea of interdisciplinarity and that skills can be integrated through the curriculum. How are you, or how is it going to happen that the people of Norway are going to be convinced that traditional content and knowledge domains are not going to suffer?
Oh, that's I start with a simple response. It's explained in the reports, and the teachers like the report and they think it's possible. So that's the very first important step. No, I think it's really a challenge, and I think we easily jump to conclusions about how productive to be at work in an interdisciplinary environment can be. So what we have said is that, for example, on the sustainable development, there is obviously different issues involved. There is from the natural sciences, chemistry, biology, physics, and so on. For the social sciences, obviously, how to share resources, and there is certain ethical concerns involved. So we don't believe that you can put all those domains together. We think that the students have to be exposed to elements over the longer periods of time, and that they work to combine 2 or 3 of those domains when they work with sustainable development. Because there is very different kind of ideas in those. If you work with a natural science problem, you can, for example, use a simulation tool to see what happens if everyone is as well off as Norwegians and drive our cars the way we do. It's not sustainable at all. So we can do use different tools to kind of simulate how this will go on. But that's then a question that involves understanding of statistics of very complicated processes about the ozone and so on. And we don't think you can easily match that to ethical consideration. So what we all said that over a 3-year period, the curriculum design should integrate not more than 3 elements, but over the whole K-12 period, you can have a curriculum model that actually carried that, so the students can be exposed to all elements in that. And we did a physicist was writing a report for the commission, and he was kind of testing that out in a very kind of simple version. And we would argue that if we are really deliberate in how we design the curriculum and not try to integrate too many things at the same time, I think that would be possible. But it's dependent that the students work with, for example, inquiry skills across the different domains. So there is subject knowledge involved, but the inquiry skills as a kind of a meta skill is really the most important issue to cultivate over time. And that's, I think, what the students will remember anyway after being exposed to all the domain knowledge. So there is certain skills that we will make sure that's part of the curriculum design and that there is time enough to actually work with those skills.
Right, thank you. That immediately raises a question around the teaching and teacher training. So if skills such as inquiry skills are to be developed, then I would assume that we need to have a lot more interactive pedagogies in the classroom. And so, Susan, given the work that you've been doing with teachers, what are the implications of this sort of approach in classrooms where you might have 50 students in very packed conditions?
Sure.
And we have those, the stress of, as Darius again was saying before, getting through the curriculum. So how does it translate? How does all this translate into those sort of realities?
So I think from our perspective, the first thing that to say is that we're not selling an answer here. There isn't an answer. I mean, I wish there was, but I don't think there is. I think that what we're trying to encourage is an approach more than anything else, and that approach therefore will be different in different places. It will need to be contextualized. So one of the things that I didn't get a chance to say earlier on is that actually the training packages that we offer are contextualized for the different places in which we work. They're delivered by local people. They're not, it's not somebody that's coming in. They're actually changed and adapted to suit the circumstance. I've only described one kind of strand of our work, and you've identified three things here that need to happen, together in order to create change. But we also think that in order to actually secure change, you need to secure change in terms of policy and practice and also culture. So I think that, we're not working in isolation in the places that we are working. We're working with the ministry in line with their priorities, with local people who are contextualizing things and encouraging an approach where teachers are looking at creating their own solutions, are looking at creating solutions that suit 50 children in the class or that suit a very high status exam system, where actually you've still got to pay attention to the fact that children have got to get through that particular examination. So it's got to be, we think, driven from the ground in order to create a solution that will work for the particular context. So I think it's about approach.
Yeah, and because the same question, of course, goes toward assessment. Notwithstanding the technology solutions and use of technologies to explore the skills and our understandings of them, how soon can we translate our understanding of the skills that's derived from those technology solutions into classroom practice? How soon can we have ways where teachers effectively can be assessing students in the classroom in a way that can be used to support their further instruction? And so I think that's for me one of the really big questions. Do you have some views, Eleanor?
Well, yeah, I need a glass ball, and so it's hard to say how soon. And there will be different levels. So and there will be different approaches for different groups of people. For example, we might create products that will be web-based, will be mobile, and then with that make them accessible to a lot of people. But those products will probably still be very narrow on specific elements, so collaboration only, or so something that is relatively narrow but still useful for a large group of people. That could, for example, be used all over the world. That won't be definitely allowed unnecessary to function by itself. How soon even to have that? I would say probably a few years at that level. I don't think we can have anything sooner than that. And I think part of the reason why, say, games have not shown a good result all the time is because they've never really been tested at scale. So we actually don't really know how to generalize the claims that have been observed, even in the very good situations. So I wanted to talk about how much evidence we have, because I really liked that conversation earlier this morning. We do have a lot of evidence about games, but it's all very restricted evidence. It's almost descriptive, so you can't generalize from it. And that's true for a lot of these innovations. We actually don't really know if those really work. If we look at 5 groups of people with 3 people per team, the only thing we can say at the end is that Johnny does that and Mary does this. But we can't generalize to Alina and Susan and Stan and Esther. We have no clue. So yes, there is a lot of evidence, but that evidence needs to be at scale in order for us to make meaningful conclusions.
I mean, at some levels, it sounds depressing. The reality is that education systems are moving. They're moving into this space. They are reforming their curriculum. They're thinking about new assessment frameworks. They're starting to think about different pedagogical approaches. And this is going to happen despite lack of lovely research that might take a few years or 30 years. So I think we're all just going to be jumping right into it. And I think the challenge for many of us who are working at different levels, globally, regionally, and in country, is to get as much research done as we can in the classrooms, find out how teachers are responding to the imperatives of their education systems, and hope that we don't make too many disastrous mistakes. And again, I know that's sounding a little bit negative, but the reality right now is that we don't have a great deal of information about how to teach these. We don't have a great deal of information about how easily students can acquire these skills through a formal education process. And we don't have a great deal of information yet about how we can capture student skills in a way that we can feed it back into that teaching and learning process. And so this is why, going back to the pathways to reform, pathways to learning, this work is incredibly important for us over the next few years. To glean what we can and to feed that back into country, regional and global systems so that we can make good decisions for our children in the future. Thank you very much to the panellists.
Thank you.
Thank you.